I guess in regards to education, while we weaponize it, even if we do actually genuinely like the person, it's funny because it's funny because one of my guy friends told me this in one of his therapy sessions that his psychology told him. He said, he was dealing with a lady that was very nasty to him. Long story short, and the therapist said to him, he said, sometimes we have to villainize people in our mind to prevent us from actually liking them. And so when we use education to weaponize against people that we may actually be compatible with, but because we have this very clear block of what we cannot compromise on, we have to then go forth with belittling or degrading them by saying, oh, well, you don't have this degree that I have, so we cannot work out together. And when you think about education as a whole, education has been utilized as a weapon in every facet of life.
Well, if I step into a relationship and I'm highly educated and I'm with this guy and I've chosen this guy is the guy for me, in my mind, I think this is the guy for me. And maybe his education is not as, he doesn't have formal education. Is it possible that or even we go on dates, do we weaponize education, meaning we go in like, oh, we put a person like, I'm better than you because you don't have an education, or my job because I make more money than you, I'm better than you. Do you think that that's the problem more so than the education and making more money?
I think it's more of we go into relationships in this interviewee dynamic where, similar to what Dela was saying, how we go into it asking initially like, so who are you? What do you do? And so we're looking for that person to start sounding off on all of their attributes, their job, their degree, whatever it is. And we're gauging this based upon what you say. If you say I have a job that makes 6, 7, 9 figures or whatever, you're like, okay, we can continue talking. But if you're saying, oh, I work at McDonald's, I flip burgers, I love what I do, you're looking at them like, but like, okay, so what about your education? And we're looking for little like markers to say, this is something that will make me be interested. But then if you say this, I'm no longer interested. And even going back to the education conversation, we don't really actually consider when people go to college, the society does not teach you when you go to college to get a degree for personal fulfillment. You go to school to get a degree to help you make more money. And so oftentimes, in the double-edged sword with that is, when you're going to a college to get a degree to make more money, it has to be more than what you spent to get that degree. And most of the time, students are not making that money at an entry-level position. But that's neither here nor there. And so we are definitely weaponizing, do you have education? Do you have these things? Because we want to use it as another barometer or litmus test to say to you that we're not interested. Instead of just simply saying, I'm not interested in you because I'm not interested, we're using other little fillers of saying, oh, well, you didn't go to this Ivy League, or you didn't go to this HBCU, or this PWI, or whatever the case may be, so I'm not interested. We're definitely weaponizing it. And it's unfair, but we're doing it with the fear of if we date down, or if we date someone who doesn't have the same accolades as us, it somehow triggers or says to other people that, I don't value myself, or I'm not upholding this tradition or this legacy or what have you.
So can I say something really quickly? So just on that right there, well said, Lauren. So what about these men or someone that has all of these degrees? However, they're not using them. You see what I'm saying? Like, you have a lot of people out here that have degrees but are not using them in, you know what I'm saying, the way they're supposed to, or not making the amount of money for the degrees that they have. So I mean, how do you, to go on date and to speak with somebody and they say, oh yeah, I have a doctor's degree, but you're not using it. You know what I'm saying?
So I think that too. So I'm taking this from two standpoints, and I just want you to know, I'm, as a single person, going, so one, and this is not a once, please do not beat me down, men. This is not a one size fits all, okay? But I do think, in my opinion, I think that sometimes when you go to college, I only think of when I think of college, especially when we talk about our university, because college is tech school, that's all of that. So we're talking when I speak of a university or even a college such as a tech school. I only look at college from my experience as being the academic portion as being 30%. 70% is the experience. But I do know that sometimes when you meet a man, they walk a little different. They move a little different. Even if he's not in his career, he just moves a little different than somebody else. Now, one is not better than the other because some people may prefer this side and some people may prefer that side. You know, it's all about whatever your preference is. But that's just what I see. And and I want to mind you, so I saw, let me just say this. So I watched that. I'm an old school documentary girl. And I watched a video on Jackie O and how she was raised. And back in the day, women did not go to school to go to universities to get an education, to get a better job. They went to the universities to be well-versed so that when they marry a wealthy man, they knew how to maneuver in the society in which he was in. They were a part of it was like a pedigree kind of thing. So if college was expensive because you weren't supposed to afford it if you weren't rich anyway. It wasn't for you. It was for them. Okay. It was kind of kept you in your place, so to speak. That's what I gathered from that documentary I saw with her. It wasn't for it wasn't for your job, career, especially for women. It was more so that you were going to raise this man's kids a certain type of way. You were well versed. In Jackie O's situation, she spoke several different languages. You know, she was made for that position. She looked good on the side of John F. K. So
she was being groomed for a president.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that education, some people use education for different things, not just a better job, because it's kind of like an expensive etiquette school.
Well, actually, education is really used across the board, regardless, is to provide access, period. That's really what it is. It says that I have this paper that should allow me to have access, whether it's access to a certain type of man, like a JFK, access to a certain type of job. But that's all education says, is that I should be able to have access. That's it.
So
I hate paying $100,000.
So now we've gotten that out of the way. I just want to make sure that people. So now we're going to talk about the weaponizing education. You understand? So I get the whole. It doesn't. Sometimes you don't have the degree because I just feel like education is so much more than just to do. You know, and even if you don't have formal education, if your husband's reading books, that's great. I've met many of men who are so smart. Think about it. Bill Gates went to Harvard for a year and dropped out, and he's Bill Gates. Some people don't need education, formal education like that, you know, but a lot do. He's exceptional. So let's just keep that, you know, but again, do we weaponize it? When we go into a relationship, do we belittle people because they don't have it?
I think it depends on how they show up. I know, like, again, like I said, if my husband never went to school, he can go toe to toe with me intellectually, period. Well, actually, I can't even say toe to toe. I know he's way more versed than I am. Very much so. Certain things that I know I can go toe to toe with him in. But if we look at a totality, just the amount of reading that he does and research, he just enjoys learning, right? I enjoy learning too, but I'm more specific to the different things that I do learn, whereas he's more well rehearsed in the things that he learned. So I would never be able to weaponize the fact that I'm like, oh, well, I got a doctorate and you only have a master's. That's not going to work, because when we go toe to toe, at the end of the day, what are we talking about, right? He's going to run rings around me in certain topics of discussion. So at that point, I can't weaponize that. But let's say I was dealing with somebody who wasn't formally educated, and you could tell because they didn't take any time to develop self, right? then I think in those instances, you can use it as a weapon. So I think it all depends on who you're with, whether or not your degree or the amount of money you have can be used as a weapon, because you also have people that is like, I don't care about money, so that's irrelevant to me, right? You have some people that have careers and that they are content in their career. They're not driven by, I need to climb the corporate ladder. I need to climb the ladder. Their goal is, I value my time. And that's me. I value my time now, whereas trying to climb to the top is no longer important to me. I want to have the time to do the things that I enjoy, right? So now you coming into the picture with a bunch of money, that's not going to work. And nor could you use that to weaponize, because I'm at a place where I can make enough money to do the things that I enjoy doing, right? So I think it has a lot to do with how you show up in the relationship, show up in a relationship and determine whether or not education or money can be used as a weapon against you. It can't if you show up with the mindset that those things aren't important to me, versus if they are, then it can be.
Yeah, I would say just from like, you know, the mindset of whether or not it's like important to you or not, and just kind of like observing it. It's like weaponizing anything is really like it's a form of judgment and an extension of fear. And it's just like, at the end of the day, if you're not educated, or however we want to define education, and that's acceptable to you, then great. I'm happy for you. A lot of the times, you know, to Lauren's point, we put ourselves in these situations and we don't want to acknowledge the fact that you're not compatible for me. And so I try to build up this case of all of these things that are wrong with you, where really there has to be a balance, you know, because one can't exist without the other. So uneducated people can't exist without educated people. And so in the same breath, it's like observing it from the outside rather than trying to put an attachment on it. It's just like, where you are is fine. And that's great for you. And I need to decide whether or not that's acceptable, an acceptable standard for myself, for you to enter into that intimate space of me. And so, yeah, I feel like a lot of the times, you know, weaponizing anything in any kind of form, it's just an extension of fear, where it's just like, just honor yourself and be true enough to yourself to be able to say, this situation or this person is not for me, rather than stepping into a space of being like, oh, well, this is everything that's wrong with you, and this is everything that makes you, you know, not good enough. Where it's like, well, what is not good enough?
Right, because that could be like a form of verbal abuse, would it not be? If you're sitting belittling somebody every single day about their shortcomings, that's not fair for the man, nor is it fair for the woman. So we can't get on one and say, oh, he's being like this to the woman, but we're not doing the same thing when the woman is doing it to the man. So we have to be careful about that.
And sometimes the reason why, you know, I guess in regards to education, why we weaponize it, even if we do actually genuinely like the person. It's funny because one of my guy friends told me this in one of his therapy sessions, that his psychology told him. He said, you know, he was dealing with a lady that was very nasty to him, long story short. And the therapist said to him, he said, you know, sometimes we have to villainize people in our mind to prevent us from actually liking them. And so when we use education to weaponize against people that we may actually be compatible with, but because we have this very clear block of what we cannot compromise on, we have to then go forth with belittling or degrading them by saying, oh, well, you know, you don't have this degree that I have, so we cannot work out together. And when you think about education as a whole, education has been utilized as a weapon in every facet of life, you know, not just in male, female, or whatever dynamic type relationships. It's been utilized as a way to prevent certain people from entering into certain institutions, you know, even with the inception of the SAT score or SAT creation, that was a spinoff to eugenics. And so that was created to prevent people who were considered undesirable or less than desirable from entering into spaces where people that didn't look like us were operating and gaining educational, gaining knowledge through education. Even with, I think what happened, there was something that took place where people were kind of getting up in arms with Harvard University. They were like, your requirements, you don't have enough of us in that institution. And so Harvard said, okay, no problem. We'll fix the problem. And so what Harvard did was they started an initiative that said, we're not going to lower our standards as far as letting people in, just walk on in. What we're going to do instead is, if you can get a perfect SAT, perfect SAT, and have a GPA that says this, we'll give you a scholarship. So now, not only are you still preventing people from entering into your institution, but now you're doubling down by saying, well, you can get in if you have this, if you did this in school. And so the kids who want to get into that school that can't go in there, they come from institutions or other high schools or primary schools or middle schools who don't even have the simple basic textbooks or curriculums that allow for them to be able to have a space where they can even begin to study for SAT or SAT score that allows for them to even be considered in the marking of being considered as, a Harvard or Ivy League graduate. And so education has been weaponized left and right, and we do it now thinking that we have a right to do it, because when we get that degree, we're like, we get a little pep in our step, like, yeah, but meanwhile, we're over here dragging behind, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in debt. And we're upset and we're still unfulfilled with ourselves because we got a degree for money. And as I mentioned before, that degree does not offer you an actual entry-level salary to pay back your loans, or the job that you have from that degree is just there to pay back the loan. So now you're struggling on top of more struggle. And now you're trying to use that to weaponize some type of fear or assuage some type of guilt by saying, well, you're not doing what I'm doing, so we can't be compatible. It's asinine, it's silly, to be honest, but here we are.
Let me just go on the record by saying my student loan debt has never stopped me from doing anything. Not one thing, so I'm happy about mine.